All right, welcome to the highly lucrative world of the hockey guy. Um, Coming to you from a Spokane hotel. If you hear any loud noise in the background, that'll probably be a train because there's a train track about 10 feet from the room. It feels. Not sure I slept through that last night, but at least I didn't sleep much. The Detroit Red Wings. So the year before, they had a really hard luck story. They're up 3 games to nothing in the Stanley Cup Final. They lose the next four in a row. Clearly, they learned from their lesson. They learned their lesson. But the other thing going on here is simple. September 28th, 1942, the U.S. Or the American and Canadian governments both decided for morale, it's important the sports keep going, which included hockey. Don't shut sports down because of World War II. That being said, there were at least 80 NHL players serving in the military and going off to war. To say that teams were crippled by this is an understatement. The Bruins were affected greatly, the Maple Leafs were affected greatly, and the Rangers were decimated. They had 5 of their top players out. Toronto was missing 7, and of course I mentioned yesterday that the top line for the Bruins all serving overseas. That said, Detroit leads the league 25-14-11 as we've gone to a 50-game schedule, and we're down to the original 6. Boston 24-17-9. Toronto 22-19-9. Montreal 19-19-12. Chicago 17-18-15. 15 ties in 50 games. The New York Rangers are the sub 500 team, 11-31-8. There were health issues with these teams. It's World War II. People have other things on their mind. Hockey's not one of them. But scoring goes up. So because of the fact that there's so many players overseas and so many players who are otherwise engaged, scoring goes up, which is standard for any period of the NHL where you do expansion, or in this case, due to war, you're going to have a dissolution of talent. And when you dilute the talent level, scoring goes up. November 21st, 1942, this is 3 weeks into the season, they do away with regular season overtime. So because of travel, they need to get to their train on time or their bus. And in order to be able to do so, we can't have overtime in a regular season. Playoffs, they keep it. Regular season, they ditch it. And then that's the last thing Frank Calder does as the commander-in-chief of the NHL. He passes away on February 4th, 1943, and Red Dutton, former owner of the New York Americans, becomes president. And of course, that becomes a big part of the whole Red Dutton curse, right? That he said the Rangers will never win a Stanley Cup again in my lifetime. But the Rangers were already well uncursed before he took over. Look at that record. MVP's Bill Cowley of the Boston Bruins. Calder goes to Gay Stewart of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Vezina goes to Johnny Mowers of the Detroit Red Wings. And the Lady Byng goes to Max Bentley of Chicago. The playoff format changes, and it's kind of funny what happens here. So it's teams 1 versus 3 and 2 versus 4. That's right. If you finish second, you face the 4th rated team. First faces 3rd. And this is a format that screws, right, Toronto. Toronto has to face league leading Detroit, and Detroit, of course, would be well aware that this is the team that beat them last year in the final. In the semifinals, because we don't have quarterfinals anymore. A, B, C, D, and E will not appear on this board again. Detroit beats Toronto 4-2. Toronto then beats Detroit in Detroit 3-2 and 4 overtimes. Detroit beats Toronto 4-2. Toronto beats Detroit at home 6-3. Then Detroit beats Toronto 4-2, and of course, being up 3-2 on Toronto, it's going to happen. Look at that. Detroit didn't lose this time. They win 3-2 in Toronto in overtime. So Detroit moves on with a 6-game series win over Toronto. Montreal plays Boston. Boston wins at home 5-4 in overtime. Boston wins at home 5-3. Boston wins on the road 3-2 in overtime. Montreal wins game 4 4-0. Boston wins game 5 5-4 in overtime. And I hope Boston really relish that win over Montreal, because it won't happen often. And I'm not kidding about that. It won't happen often. In the finals, Detroit seemed to learn their lesson. Or they played against a lesser opponent. I mean, the record would state that Boston was better, but when you look at the actual series, Boston didn't give Detroit the amount of trouble that Toronto did. 6-1 win for Detroit, 4-3 win for Detroit, and then back-to-back shutouts in Boston, 4-0 and 2-0. So it is a complete shutdown by Johnny Mowers, who allows 4 goals in the finals. And at a 50-game schedule, goalies are still playing every game. Backup? What's a backup? We're not thinking about backups yet. It's not a problem. But this is how the NHL was during the war. It's a league where certain teams are benefiting from the war, that they're not losing as many players. Detroit, Chicago, and of course Montreal. There was always an undercurrent of anger towards Montreal, and I can remember with my grandfather, you had to watch mentioning the certain things, because he did fight in the war. Well, he served in the war. He served in London. He didn't actually go to the front lines. I'm not going to say fought, because that overstates it. But he did go through some pretty grisly scenes, and he did do some stuff. But the province of Quebec largely held out and decided it wasn't their war and they weren't fighting it. And that was a large bone of contention in the country of Canada. And my grandfather's generation was pretty adamant about certain things with the province of Quebec. My generation, no problem with Quebec. It's all fine. Created poutine, everything's fantastic. But it was something. There was one of those things in my mind would be, don't mention Quebec, don't mention. And if Quebec politicians were on the TV during the news, I would just sort of close my ears as a little kid and pretend I didn't hear what was being said. All right. That being said, we're only 2 years from the end of the war, but things are starting to shape up. Toronto, Detroit, Montreal. They will be the dominant teams for the next while. But there you go. The 1943 Stanley Cup champions, the Detroit Red Wings, from a hotel in Spokane. This is me. And hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.